There we go. I hit record. Let's try that again. Hello. Welcome to Relay Space. Today we're going to be covering the moon and Mars. Yeah, we're professional. For anyone that doesn't know, this is Relay Space. It is our bi-weekly podcast where we talk about stuff that's not Star Citizen. Though we might be including some fun little Star Citizen tidbits this week. You'll have to watch and find out. So let's get started with a nice little quote, and then we'll do the week in space, and we'll start on our show. So, from Buzz Aldrin. You might have heard of him. Maybe. What are you going to do with astronauts who first reach the surface of Mars and then turn around and rocket back homeward? What are they going to do? Write their memoirs? Would they go again? Having them repeat the voyage, in my view, is dim-witted. Why don't they stay there on Mars?
Gotta love Buzz.
I like Buzz. Oh, that's bothering me. I'm slightly lower than you. I'm slightly lower than you. There. That should be there. Okay. Whew.
Hello, Sargrath.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that, everyone. It looks like we're in the same space, except Nehkara is giant and I'm tiny because I'm good at stuff.
Yeah, my head's like twice as big as yours. Anyway,
I literally didn't notice until right now.
Love it.
So, Nehkara, what do we got for the week? Are the levels okay? I think they should be good.
Yeah.
Okay.
To me. But, I mean, I'm just sitting over here. I don't know. Are the levels okay, folks?
And Nehkara, what have we got this week for the week in space?
So to give a couple pictures to show here. Today, Ariane Space had their 100th launch of the Ariane 5 rocket. Very super awesome rocket. I love this rocket. And it was carrying 2 satellites to geostationary transfer orbit. Do you have picture?
Yes, I am getting picture. I'm working on picture. I've got to play around with things because look, I've made us small.
Wow,
I know,
really small. Hey, but we're the same size now, though.
Yeah, I'm better when we're like this. There's a picture.
Perfect picture. Yeah, so Ariane 5 is approaching the end of its life, but it did have its 100th launch today, and has a very, very solid history. I believe they've only had 1 or 2 failures, and congratulations to Ariane Space. And now I'm going to make you change the picture.
I can do that, I think.
As JPL continues to try to recover the Mars Opportunity rover, they actually were able to get an image of Opportunity from the Mars reconnaissance orbiter. And you can see that picture there.
There it is.
As you can see, Opportunity is that little dot right there in the middle of that box. I think they just wanted to make sure it was actually still there.
One second. I'm doing this live.
Oh, you're zooming.
I'm doing this live.
Technology.
We have the technology to manually zoom in. Look,
enhance.
It's a dot.
Look at the dot.
That's a rover.
Yep, that is a rover. I don't know this, but given the ridiculous powers of JPL scientists, I'm hoping that they can use what little data they get from that picture to maybe compare it against previous pictures taken from orbit of the rover and see if they can figure out whether or not it's covered in dust.
I mean, it's probably covered in dust. Really, what they have to do is send down a Martian Roomba.
That would be very helpful, actually. It's almost guaranteed that the only reason it hasn't woken up so far is that its solar panels are covered in dust.
Oh, then you don't even need a Roomba. You just need a robot with a broom.
Pretty much. Or a light breeze.
That too.
That's actually part of why they are still fairly optimistic of recovering opportunity, is that if there's any wind, which there's wind on Mars, obviously that's how we got the dust storm. If they get a decent breeze there, it could clean off the solar panels and boom, just come back to life. Right. So we're going to go on to our main topic of today, which is living in space, specifically living on the moon or on Mars. So for a long time now, this has kind of seemed like science fiction, because once we went to the moon, we went, oh, that's boring, and stopped going to the moon.
Which I think there's really something quite wrong with us for that very fact, by the way. I mean, it's the moon. That's all.
Exactly.
It's the moon.
It's the moon.
Yeah.
So what we're going to talk about today are the challenges and some of the sort of bright sides of trying to have a permanent settlement on the moon and Mars. It's actually up for debate as to which of these will happen first. SpaceX seems to have the most momentum of any space organization, and they really don't seem to have a whole lot of interest in themselves putting a colony on the moon. They'll help if someone else does it, but they're not really interested in doing it themselves.
But Nehkara, the moon is so much closer. Why would we not go to the moon first?
So, we're going to start with... Basically, we're going to talk about what's hard about the moon, but we're going to start with what's not hard about the moon. The moon is close.
I learned an interesting thing, and I'm going to put up an image talking about that interesting thing, because the moon is close, but how close exactly is the moon to Earth?
400,000 kilometers.
Do you know what you can fit in 400,000 kilometers?
All of the planets.
All of the planets! Did you know that? Every single planet fits between us and the moon.
With room to spare.
I learned a thing today.
You wouldn't want to do that, though.
I mean, it might mess with us slightly, but...
Really bad things would happen. Oh, man. So, I mean, yeah, it's close. Well, I'll put it this way. It's the closest. So one of the other things that that the moon has going for it that we discovered fairly recently is that the moon has lava tubes. They've been looking for these on the moon for a long time, because one of the ways of solving some of the problems we're going to talk about later is to put your settlement underground. Now, digging requires heavy machinery. That's out of order, David.
It wasn't supposed to do that yet.
But there's a guy with an arm sticking out of his chest.
Wasn't supposed to do it.
So the moon has lava tubes. We've discovered these recently. We have very good evidence for them. There's also a lot of speculation that in these lava tubes you would find water ice inside them. Probably fairly pure. So you could have a lot of resources for your lunar colony all in the same place. And you wouldn't have to dig. And lava tubes are exactly what they sound like. Many hundreds of millions of years ago, the Mars was the moon was volcanically active, and these lava tubes are the remnants of similar lava tubes you can find in like Hawaii. But
so are you telling me that the moon is not actually a giant bird that hatches out of an egg and then...
No, it is not. I think we can say that with a reasonable amount of certainty.
Okay, cool.
The other thing is that I kind of mentioned there is that the moon does have readily available water ice, and not just under the surface. They've actually found like hard evidence that there is a significant amount of readily available water ice at the surface on the moon in many places. So that is not looking to be a problem. There looks like there's a lot of water available there. And the other thing is that the moon does have some gravity, as opposed to what we were talking about last week, which was, living on space stations. There are a lot of problems that come with having no gravity. Having some gravity allows you to move around easier, and to a small extent limits some of the health problems associated with living in microgravity. Now, the main issues that we have are radiation, low gravity, no atmosphere, moon dust, power generation, and food. Now, we're going to move on to radiation, and we'll have a guy with an arm sticking out of his chest.
Radiation! Crazy! Look at that!
So, radiation is an ever-present danger outside the protection of the Earth's magnetic field. Any permanent base on the moon will need to consider radiation protection. Obviously, the sources of the radiation are mostly from the sun and cosmic rays from everywhere else in the universe. Any permanent base on the moon will need to consider radiation protection. One of the ways of achieving this is to build the base under the surface, as I mentioned with our lava tubes. And because the lava tubes create like natural caves, we can just stick the actual buildings of a habitat inside there, and then have solar panels laid out on the surface outside of the cave to generate power, run cables inside. Also, obviously, communications arrays out on the surface as well.
The things that aren't fleshy human bits could be outside.
Yeah,
and
pretty
then
much.
the
Or
fleshy
used to house the fleshy human bits.
Yes, and then we keep the fleshy human bits inside where they're safe and fleshy.
Exactly. The other thing that I don't actually mention.
Actually,
here,
Bang Frickin' Chow has a good question there. Is there any danger for earthquakes and such in that?
We don't believe the Earth. Yeah, right, the Earth. We don't believe the moon is geologically active anymore.
No, hang on, Nehkara. Don't be saying that the Earth doesn't have earthquakes. You're sounding like a Republican.
That might be one of the worst things you've ever said to me. Sorry for anyone who's a Republican in here. Anyway, earthquakes are not a concern on the moon as far as we're aware. We do not believe the moon is currently geologically active. It doesn't seem to have been geologically active in the recent past. But that is actually something we would need to learn about the moon when we were there. It would allow us to do a lot more detailed scientific study. And
one of the
given
problems
the low,
being we just haven't been there in a long time, really.
Yeah. And also the part of the problem too is we didn't send scientists before in general. We were just trying to do stuff, and we were using the people who didn't care if they, flew this incredibly dangerous bomb into space, which were, test pilots mostly. They weren't scientists. So I think that a new era of missions that are full of geologists and planetary scientists would be huge. Now, one of the things that I also was thinking about is that you could also potentially use radiation shielding materials to just build a base on the surface. But most of those materials are very heavy, which becomes a problem with rockets having limited payload mass. So, I mean, it is possible to do that. I'm not sure if anyone ever will, but yeah. So this might give you a bit of an idea here. This
Slightly
is
complicated, but
yeah, this is Earth's magnetic field, and it's very strong for based on what we're seeing from other planets. For a world the size of Earth, our magnetic field is very strong, and it protects us from radiation. Now, one technology that's being considered is a generation of localized magnetic fields. Essentially, they would be replicating a smaller version of Earth's magnetic field. So I'm not talking about localized as in enveloping the whole moon. I'm talking about localized as in protecting a colony from radiation using a magnetic field generator. And you might go, well, I don't know if we can generate magnetic fields. It wouldn't be particularly dissimilar to an MRI machine on Earth. Right. Work will need to be done to consider how effective this would be and the drawbacks. You know, there are some drawbacks to running a very large electromagnet, in terms of like power consumption, cooling, and of course, you know, you'd have to protect it from anyone with anything ferromagnetic getting anywhere near it, lest they fly into it. So there are some problems with that, but it's definitely under consideration, and they are looking at not only using this for colonies, but also for spacecraft. Now, low gravity. So this is the ever-present issue with space travel. We have 1G on Earth, and there isn't 1G elsewhere, mostly. Unfortunately, the one planet we could visit where the gravity is actually quite similar to Earth is Venus. And there are other problems with Venus, like gigantic clouds of sulfuric acid. Anyway.
That's interesting. Whoa, why is it doing that? Man.
Whoa.
Sorry. It wasn't appearing earlier, and then it just appered, and I don't know why. It did not appear when I wanted it to. Low gravity.
Low gravity. This is an actual shot of people on the moon.
Yeah. Scientists. This is why they want to now send scientists, but because this is what normal people do on the moon.
Yeah, pretty much. So obviously the normal problems with low gravity, bone loss, muscle atrophy, nasal congestion, vision issues, and your taste buds don't work properly.
Which that one I really find strange.
You get fluid overload in your body when you're in low gravity, and it causes your tongue to swell up, which means there's more space between the nerves and the taste buds, so they don't work properly.
Weird.
Yeah, it's really weird.
Humans are strange.
Yep. So there are issues, but even the fact that or the moon, I cannot stop getting that wrong. The moon, even though
you have said everything like but the moon a dozen times already.
The moon does have 17% of the gravity of Earth, so it is something. It does alleviate the issues somewhat, but they're probably still going to be present. There's a lot of research going into how to deal with these problems. There have been there's like research into drugs to limit bone loss, and that research has actually led, or very well could lead to solutions for people who aren't going to space, who just have normal bone loss, like people with osteoporosis. Yay, space. So another big problem on the moon is there's no atmosphere. Like, there is, but there's so little it's not even worth mentioning. And I think it's like metal. Anyway.
Wait. You're gonna have to go back and explain that one slightly. the Earth's, sorry, now I'm doing it too. The moon's atmosphere is metal?
Yeah. So
now, are you talking like liquid metal, or like there's just metallic shards all over the place, sort of floating, but not because of the low gravity?
okay, I can't remember where I saw that. I apologize for that. Oh, here we go. Composition. So I am totally sure I saw that atmosphere.
This is good. We're going on a complete tangent. I'm having to do research, and I apologize. Because
Why do you apologize?
I don't know. Hey, Elwook.
Oh, that's what I had heard about it. Oh, they believe it used to have a metallic atmosphere before its atmosphere disappeared.
Okay.
Really weird shit. Anyway, its atmosphere now is made up of things like argon, helium, neon, sodium, potassium, and a little bit of hydrogen. But there's almost no atmosphere at all. Most people just consider it to be a vacuum. Now, this actually causes some big problems. Having no atmosphere is a lot different than having a little bit of atmosphere. Having no atmosphere means you can't land spacecraft the normal way there at all. For a long time, the normal way to land a spacecraft was to use parachutes. Well, if you don't have an atmosphere, that doesn't work. You can deploy parachutes, but they're not going to do anything for you. So if you're going to land on the moon, you have to land propulsively, something that SpaceX is very good at, by the way. Obviously, one of the other big issues you run into is if you are on the surface, you have to wear a pressure suit. Basically, this is to keep your body, and not like just scattered all over the surface of the moon. But the third one is not quite as obvious. The third part is if you don't have an atmosphere, you can't utilize that atmosphere to produce resources locally.
Pressure suit.
Kind of. That is not a suit that would be used on the surface of Mars or the moon. That is more of a flight suit, but it actually would probably work for a little while.
It would work until the regolith cut it to shreds, probably.
That's also part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that brings that was a beautiful segue, man. Right into moon dust.
Yeah.
All right. So unfortunately, moon dust is fairly nasty stuff. It's abrasive and sharp. It wears through materials very easily, can damage many materials. And additionally, it's really dark. So if it gets on anything, specifically structures, it can cause them to heat up a lot when the sun is shining on them because it, of course, just like, when you're wearing a black shirt on a hot day.
I actually couldn't find any good comparison images, but I was trying to find something of comparing basically the moon's regolith with, Earth soil, and I couldn't really find anything I liked to put up here, so I figured I'd put up,
that's a great picture.
It's a great picture, so I put it up. But basically, regolith is sharp.
Yeah, and so the reason it's sharp is just that there's no weathering at all on the moon. There's no wind. There's no water flow. So all the little tiny shards of rock just stay little tiny shards of rock. They don't round out into little, grains. Like we have here.
Sand is round.
Yeah.
Regolith
which is really
knives.
Pretty much.
Literal knives.
So the way to deal with this is basically they'll have the idea is to use airlocks to get into buildings that have like multiple stages, and also the use of magnetic vacuums to like remove as much of it as possible.
So there's a couple of questions here I kind of wanna touch on. One from Bang Frickin' Chow. Basically, if the moon is a barren desert.
Yes.
Yeah. Why colonize it other than research?
Research.
Honestly,
there's a lot of argument that it may be a very long time until we actually colonize the moon. It's more likely we'll have a permanent base there, akin to our base in Antarctica, where you just have a lot of researchers there, but you don't really have any normal, like, semblance of a town or city.
We'll talk a little bit about some of the plans to colonize it later, and we'll cover that a little bit then. Oops, sorry. Actually, can I?
I can permit.
I was gonna just like swordify Commander Llama.
Okay. Well, while you're doing that, I'm going to permit him.
I don't know how right now. Wait, is that maybe I can do this? Swordify. Cool. For anyone that doesn't know, Commander Llama is one of Relay's writers. He's been writing a lot of good stuff, and he's actually just started up a new series on his playthroughs of Star Citizen that are, pretty good. Nice try, the Grizz. There was a second one here. The Grizz, coincidentally enough, the Grizz asks, if moon soil makes structures heat up, does that mean the moon is warm?
So it has no atmosphere, right? So during the middle of the day, it gets incredibly hot. In the middle of the night, it gets incredibly cold.
Like a desert.
Yeah, but worse, because it has no atmosphere, so it has nothing to moderate the temperature at all. This is actually why, I remember I said there is surface ice, a lot of surface ice in the moon. Where you find that surface ice on the moon is in permanently shadowed craters that never see direct sunlight. Because there's no way for heat to move around on the moon, really, or not much of a way for it to move around. In permanently shadowed craters, the ice will just stay there, permanently, essentially. All right. So one of the things that we need to also consider is that they do believe, they have no evidence for this yet because we've never actually been stupid enough to try it, but there is a lot of thought that moon dust would be incredibly damaging to human lungs. It has a lot of similar properties to things like
knives.
Asbestos is a good example. So there's a lot of, like, this all ties into the same concern. Need airlocks, need magnetic vacuums to keep all of the moon dust not inside the habitats. All right, so power generation. So power generation is less of a true problem and more of an important consideration for the moon. Power generation on the moon is essentially limited to only solar or nuclear options. Thankfully, we have tons of experience with solar panels on the moon and in space. NASA has a very promising kilopower program to create a compact, reliable, and self-regulating nuclear reactor for use in space.
Solar panels.
The initial... Yeah, solar panels. I thought that was a pretty funny picture. Kilopower is awesome. The initial test reactor that you can see in this picture here produced 5.5 kilowatts for a 28-hour continuous runtime last year, which also showed the safety of the system by demonstrating that the system's ability to successfully handle various simulated issues and failures.
So how much is 5.5 kilowatts?
So it's 5,500 watts. So it's about, that would probably be about half the size, about half to a full size installation, solar installation on a house here. The general thought is that 4 kilopower reactors, which are supposed to go up to 10 kilowatts, would be enough for a colony. So 40,000 watts.
Now, it says it powered it for 28 hours continuously.
Yep.
Is that the life of the system, or was that just they ran it for 28 hours and were like, oh, this is good enough?
So they were successfully testing. What they were doing was they were trying to reach another milestone on NASA's path to ready a technology for use in space. They're called technology readiness levels. And in order to do that, there's all these stepping stones. This one was demonstrate the use of the technology, demonstrate that it works. And so they ran the reactor for 28 hours straight, simulating a whole bunch of potential problems with it, and it handled them all perfectly and generated more power than they thought it would. So they were very happy with that. In addition, this was a pretty cool note. They designed, built, and tested the reactor for less than $20 million. Considering there's only one of them, that's actually very low cost. You could definitely see that price coming down in the future, and it's not even that high to begin with for space hardware. So you want to show that second picture?
Yep.
And this is sort of their concept of what a single kilopower reactor might look like on the moon. Now, that giant like fan shape, you might think looks like a solar panel, but it's actually a radiator. It's used to radiate excess heat away from the reactor. Now, lots of the challenges that we're dealing with on the moon here are are food. Obviously, greenhouses are your best bet here.
Wait,
you need to.
How did that sneak in here? Sorry, wrong image.
Not that type of greenhouse. If you find a way to deal with the radiation such that it won't harm the plants or the equipment too much, then you could put a greenhouse on the surface. If not, then you can just do it underground with stronger artificial lighting. But that will take up some of your power, of course. Thankfully, water seems to be fairly plentiful. So as long as you create a system that recycles the water, you should be fine. Now, generating enough food for an outpost to be sustainable long-term on its own is a significant challenge. It's not impossible, but it's very likely that for a very long time, any such outpost would be partially reliant on being resupplied from Earth.
I'm confused. The Martian lived up there for like 14 years, if my memory of the movie serves, on nothing but potatoes.
Not 14 years, it was less than a year, I think.
Oh.
And
my memory is wrong.
He was almost skeletal by the end, and he lost a ton of weight. That part of the Martian's actually fairly accurate, and you could see how he was sort of wasting away as he didn't really have enough food. And so that's sort of it for challenges. For now, we're going to turn this over to David to talk about some of the projects, the current projects that are actually being considered for a moon settlement.
First off, turning anything over to me as I try and run the images is a horrible idea. Also, and it's a terrible idea, but let's try and make this happen. So
we're here at Relay. We specialize in terrible ideas.
Terrible ideas. Okay. So I was doing a bunch of research today trying to find out about possible lunar habitation projects. Now, one of the things I sort of noticed is that there aren't many, and we'll get even more into that problem when we hit Mars, but there's only a couple of even slightly fleshed out habitation plans, like colonization plans. And there were more further in the past, like around when, I'm assuming, around when NASA was actually still getting funding. They had bigger plans, but as funding died down and as people sort of realized that it's not really all that much on the moon, the plans for like that we know of. The plans we still haven't found the monolith, obviously.
We're working on it.
We're working on it. The plans for moon colonization have sort of dwindled, but there are still several really promising ones, actually. And okay, I'm going to try and do this. I've got 5 videos queued up, but they each run only for a couple of seconds, and I'm supposed to be trying to talk about it at the same time. So I apologize if and when this goes terribly, but we're going to look at one of the plans by the ESA, which is the European Space Agency.
This is probably the most
well-respected
plan.
It's called the Moon Village. It's a plan that the ESA has. The ESA, China's involved in it, and I think 30 other nations, 150 other agencies. The idea is basically that right there, that image you're seeing is kind of the idea. And then this guy appears, and I want him to stop talking. And we skip further in the video. But basically the idea is sort of land a whole bunch of, if I hit play on this one, you can kind of see it in a second. Where is it? It comes along here in just a moment. Sorry. First of all, you've got, I don't know why they've got vacuums, but you land a bunch of pods that essentially inflate. So you've got inflatable housing, and then you use these little robot things to sort of build a wall around that pod from out of regolith, essentially, hopefully shielding it from lots of the bad things and the radiation. And then you stuff people inside it, and they live in it. They're working with the 30-ish different, actually, bang freaking chow, it's exactly a space igloo. They're looking on habitation capsules. Basically, they want to, hopefully by around 2030s, send some manned missions to the moon, and then create a bunch of these habitation capsules, and then come back and sort of leave the robots there to take care of things and sort of be essentially be run by people on Earth for a bit, and then they'd send people back. It's kind of strange, but
can I just play that for a second?
Yeah.
One of the most important parts with current 21st century thinking on moon projects is simply, and it's not that complicated as an idea. A lot of the idea is leave the shit there.
Yeah.
And make the stuff you put there useful over a long period of time, so you can go back. Part of the problem was none of the stuff we took there in Apollo was of any use afterward. And we never built habitats or anything, really. And so a lot of the idea is just to go there to stay instead of going there to visit.
Yeah. And that's you'll see that sort of thought again very shortly, actually. But the Moon Village project is it includes a bunch of different ideas. One of them is I think they're called Foster and Partners, and their idea is, I mean, you kind of saw it in that video, a hard shell that inflated into a non-hard interior, and then basically the idea is to 3D print out of regolith a surface around that, and then you've got little hatches on the top that you could open for light and then close for safe. It's interesting, but it's also one of the only slightly detailed plans we have, and it doesn't even plan on really much of anything at all until the 2030s. The next one I wanted to talk a little bit about, I don't even really have any This
That's
one's
because it's Blue Origin.
it's because it's Blue Origin, and all we really have from them is one rocket going up and down. And this isn't even really. We have literally nothing on this. All we have is a couple of years ago, Bezos.
Jeff who?
Yeah, he basically said that he wants to colonize the moon. Apparently, they got some NASA funding to help for it. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah,
That's
they
it.
are basically Blue Moon is just a lander, a moon lander
For now. So the idea is they've got Blue Moon, which would be their moon lander, and Bezos wants to use that moon lander to land structures. That's all the plan that we know of for now, I believe.
The only part that might tie a couple things. First of all, there's a lot of rumors behind the scenes that Blue Origin is talking a lot to ESA about Moon Village and about like they want to help ESA do that. So that may be a very, very helpful strategic partnership there. Additionally, there is likely to be some kind of an announcement related to this in about a week at the International Astronautical Congress, where Jeff Bezos is speaking.
And if there is,
we'll cover it.
Maybe we'll cover it on The Week in Space on a future episode.
Yep.
Okay, where am I now?
Bigelow,
yes. I don't even have any images of this either. Bigelow is an interesting one. Their plan is... There's actually a video of this, but it was like 6 minutes long and showed about 2 scenes and was really boring, so I didn't cut it. The idea for Bigelow is not really a on-the-moon project, but it is an inflatable, again, we're going with inflatables, an inflatable habitat that would be launched from Earth into Earth orbit, inflated using a bunch of, I guess, they'd launch a couple other missions up there with stuff to inflate it with, inflate this inflatable thing, and then send it into low moon orbit. And then there would be an inflatable habitation pod in low lunar orbit. And there's a couple companies that have signed on to use those inflatable rooms, but it's only planned for low moon orbit. Not really sure. Yeah.
Now, Bigelow is a very interesting company. They have generally they're considered to be they have good technical expertise. They know what they're doing, and they're poorly managed. They are one of these few new space companies that have actually done something remarkable. They have actually produced and demonstrated an inflatable space station module. There's one on the space station right now that they made. It's still there. It's so you're never really sure what you're going to get from Bigelow. There have been a lot of rumors over the years coming out of that company. They're not managed very well, but they do actually do things. So you got to give them some credit.
I mean, just getting something attached to the ISS is no small feat.
Not at all. No, it's very impressive.
One thing Commander Llama was talking about is Bezos believes that the moon is valuable, while Musk believes that the Mars is valuable, which is actually good. It means that they're both trying to do something completely different and aren't really treading on each other's feet too much.
Yep. And honestly, Bezos has almost no interest in Mars at all.
Yep.
So that could actually be really helpful. Blue Origin's idea long term, just like SpaceX's idea long term. So Blue Origin's idea long term is the industrialization of cislunar space. Cislunar means basically the area between the Earth and Mars. Or sorry, the Earth and the Moon. Oh my god, I cannot believe I keep doing that. The
It's
Earth
actually
and
getting
the
kind of
moon.
entertaining.
The Earth and the Moon. Okay, anyway, let's go ahead. Russia and China.
Yeah. So this is the other interesting one we have, really. So there's Russia and China have signed a deal on a bunch of stuff, space exploration, stuff. But one of the things, stuff, I'm incredibly professional, but one of the things is lunar exploration. So there's no real indication on what's happening with this, but there is a Russia and China kind of deal. We have, though, seen some of China's progress towards a lunar colony. Just give me a second here. Again, doing this and looking at my notes. Let's hope that this shows up. So this is an image from inside the Yugong-1, the lunar palace, which in May, a couple of volunteers emerged from 110 days in a lunar test pod. So the idea is before you send a bunch of people to the moon, you test whether or not stuff works. And look, they've got growy plants and CPU fans. And this was like, this here is basically the only image I could find of anything even related to it. It's not great, but that to me looks like a Chinese base on the moon. So I'm running with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Sorry. What else? Where am I? Anyway, there have been a couple of groups to, stay in this lunar test pod. Their facility treats human waste with a biofermentation process. Volunteers grew experimental crops and vegetables with the help of food waste and byproducts. The lunar palace has 2 plant cultivation modules and an accommodation cabin, which is a 42 square meter thing containing sleeping cubicles, a common room, a bathroom, and some room for raising animals. Not too many details on when they would be launching this, but there was some mention that it would be what's their launcher name?
Oh, they're Long March vehicles.
Yes.
They have a whole series of them. Long March 9, probably?
They were talking about launching this to Long March 9. Interestingly enough, they were also saying that the first test for Long March 9, for the 9th thing, I can speak, would be to actually send it to Mars to recover samples and bring them back. That's their apparent first test that they want. And then after that, they want to basically put up a little base on the moon.
Okay.
What?
That's quite the test flight.
Yeah, I know.
This thing no one's ever done before.
That's fine.
All right. Okay.
So, NASA. We can't.
I did want to quickly mention one thing.
Yep, go.
The first manned mission from China to the moon is currently making preliminary plans for 2036. So it's likely that any of these plans would probably be, you're talking 2040s, 2050s.
Yeah. So it's a ways out, but they are still plans.
Yep.
I do want to talk a little bit about NASA's plans. NASA doesn't have many plans for the moon right now. I know they've been told to go back, but they're also mainly focused on other stuff. Sorry. Okay, where am I? One of NASA's plans that I heard I thought was fantastic. So the plan is not to land a stationary base. on the moon, right? So most of these, if you even look up at the ESA's plan, it's to land a base and build stuff around it and have a permanent base sitting there. NASA's plan is actually to use sort of a mobile robot colony. So they'd have a couple different vehicles, exploration vehicles and scouting rovers, things like a athlete, where is it? All-terrain hex-limbed extraterrestrial rover athlete, or which is a 6-legged heavy lift cargo carrier, or an SEV, which is sort of an updated version of Apollo's old moon buggy. Astronauts would drive around in SEVs, which are pressurized so that they can sit inside them without the space suits. They'd drive around in those. SEV is even protected by thick shielding from radiation. They'd send a couple crewed missions to, set things up. And then after those crew missions all went back, the mobile rovers would decamp from the place where they want to go, which is Shackleton Crater, I believe, which we'll talk about in a moment. They decamp from Shackleton Crater by themselves and head for Malpert Massif, which is a ridge about 81 miles away from Shackleton. Engineers on Earth would be driving these robots, though the robots would be able to pick their own way, at least part of the way. And about 6 months after the robotic convoy set out, another astronaut convoy would meet up with them at Malpert, and then the cycle would begin again. The robots would move around the southern half of the moon, scouting and scientific survey work with astronauts, and the astronauts would just land, do their research, go home. The robots would move to another site of interest. Astronauts would come, land, do their research, and go home, which...
I think that's kind of a cool idea.
I'm hurt. Anyway, I thought their mobile rover base was a cool plan.
That is a really cool plan, actually.
And the last one I wanted to talk about, speaking about Shackleton and the Shackleton Crater a little bit, there's a company called Shackleton Energy. They want to mine the moon for fuel. Specifically,
what type of fuel?
Specifically, if they can find water ice, which scientists have long believed that Shackleton Crater has, if they can find water ice there, basically they could separate water ice into liquid oxygen and hydrogen, which would serve as modern rocket fuel. And basically they want a base at Shackleton Crater, mining water, turning it into liquid oxygen and hydrogen, using that for further exploration.
So they want to make a gas station on the moon.
Yes, it's a lunar gas station. I don't know what they'd call it.
Lunar gas station.
Probably.
Go with the obvious.
If it's NASA, yes. If it's SpaceX, the BFD, which could stand for the Big Fuel Depot.
Okay, fair enough.
Or the Big Fucking Fuel Dump.
Yeah. All right,
and that's the plans to colonize the moon. Hey.
Yeah. They're kind of few and far between at this point, but the hope is that with big advancements here coming in the next 10 or 15 years, that it will be a lot easier to do. So hopefully there'll be a lot more plans. All right.
The professional comes back.
You ready for our first image?
Oh, yes.
From
right,
Mars?
Images. It's been a bit. There weren't many images for my segment.
Not too many.
Okay.
All right. So
Mars.
what's hard about colonizing Mars? So guess what? Radiation.
I feel like we're going to be hearing the same things we heard earlier when talking about the moon.
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of try and limit the crossover here, but so there are some similar problems, obviously, with Mars that there are with the moon. The moon, Mars actually. Oh my God, I'm getting them backwards again. Except the other way. Oh my. There are actually some localized magnetic fields on Mars, but their utility for protecting humans is completely unknown, and they're also not in the right place. They are in other places where we are not really considering putting a colony. So not really that helpful. Now, super cool thing. NASA is considering long-term a way of actually shielding the entire planet of Mars from the solar wind, which would get rid of most of that radiation. This plan is to put a fairly large magnetic field generator at the Mars-Sun L1 Lagrangian point. So the Mars-Sun L1 Lagrangian point, in case you're wondering, is a fixed point in space that is always between Mars and the Sun. It orbits with Mars around the Sun, and it's always at the same angle between Mars and the Sun. If you put a magnetic shield there, you could create this tail that basically deflects the solar wind away, so that Mars is inside this tail and is protected from the solar wind.
A couple questions here. Elwook asks how expensive it is to convert ice to oxygen and hydrogen from earlier.
How expensive it is in what way? That's my question. I mean, you need energy, so you just basically hook up an electrolyzer to solar panels or nuclear reactors.
And then is that previous image we were showing, let me put it back up again for a second.
Yes, it is to scale. Mars is significantly smaller than the Earth.
Do you know by any chance, I was actually just trying to do the research on this, what percentage it is? Is Mars like a half? A tenth? I can't do math. So
Mars's radius is right around 3,400 kilometers, and the Earth's radius is about 6,400 kilometers. So that's the radius, right? So you double that for diameter. So the diameter of the Earth ends up being about almost 13,000 kilometers, and Mars is like 6,800.
So it's half the size of the Earth.
Basically. And yeah, so it's about the right size. That is approximately the right size.
Cool.
Now, so yeah, the NASA is considering that plan to protect the entire planet of Mars from solar radiation. So that could actually have a bunch of really positive effects. One of them is, hey, less radiation on Mars. Secondly, and this one's interesting, Mars would start to regenerate its atmosphere. So that's interesting. It's basically like probably the easiest step in starting terraforming of Mars. Low gravity. Now, look, yeah, you could just use solar to split solar energy to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. Energy usage isn't really that big of a barrier. And plus, you save so much by having a place to refuel that's not in Earth's very deep and annoying gravity well. All right. So, we're back to low gravity again. So this one's sort of a. We actually don't know how much of a problem it is. This is a big question mark. Mars has 38% of the gravity of Earth, so that's not insignificant. It's more than a third. We really have no idea at all how humans respond to 38% of the gravity. We know how much they respond to 0%. It's not great. So we basically just don't know. It'll be much easier to move around on Mars. And hopefully some of our bodily processes that require gravity to work properly will also work on Mars. But we just don't know. Now, the next problem for Mars is it has a thin atmosphere. So this is also a plus and a minus. And we start to see some of the reasons why Mars is better than the Moon. So Mars has a thin atmosphere, but it doesn't have no atmosphere. It has about 100th, I believe, the atmosphere of Earth.
Which would increase if you could do the NASA...
the magnetic shield. And basically, the atmosphere of Mars used to be much thicker, used to be much more similar to Earth's. But when Mars lost its magnetic field, which was likely due to its core cooling down somewhat, or lost most of its magnetic field, then it didn't have any protection for its atmosphere, and the solar wind
movie about
started
that happening to Earth.
Yes, you did. The solar wind started to strip away the atmosphere, and slowly, over hundreds of millions of years, it lost most of its atmosphere. So, unfortunately, astronauts still require a pressure suit on Mars. There's nowhere near enough pressure to get rid of that problem. But thankfully, because there is some atmosphere on Mars, you can use it for resource production. And specifically, SpaceX would like to use it for use the CO2 in the atmosphere on Mars and water ice to create methane fuel. If you mix carbon dioxide with water in the Sabatier reaction, you get methane, which is what fuels their rocket. So they can get home.
Couldn't they just bring a whole bunch of cows?
No.
Damn. I thought it was being clever.
Cows also like air.
Weaklings.
So Mars dust. Mars dust, again, you'll start to see these things happen. Mars dust is somewhat less sharp than moon dust due to increased weathering from wind. However, it's still much sharper than the dust here on Earth, and it may still pose many of the same problems. Additionally, due to Mars having wind, it also sometimes has gigantic dust storms, as you can see in this video. From like 3 months ago.
Here we go.
So, as you can see, really big dust storm. This was a particularly large dust storm. They don't see global events like this very often. I think they seem to come around once every like 6 to 10 years. Now, one of the really cool things about this is on July 1st, obviously you can see the entire planet is just like completely encompassed with dust. But if you look really closely on the May 28th image, as it comes around here, you can see that if you look at the southern hemisphere, you can see where that dust storm started.
It's kind of insane to think that that's basically an entire planet.
Yep.
Covered in one dust storm.
And it was so dark at the surface that it was essentially completely nighttime. You would be very challenged to see
right
anything.
There, there's a little dot in the northern hemisphere of clear. Is that by any chance that mountain there?
To be completely honest, I don't know. I think so. That might be Olympus Mons, but I'm not sure. But yeah, there's a few spots where you can sort of see through the dust, but not much.
Now, Analemma has a good question there, I think. Venus has no magnetic field. Why doesn't the more intense solar wind not affect Venus's atmosphere? And no, look, I did not see the guy who wants to make lasers on Mars with its atmosphere.
You know what? I'm going to be completely honest. I did not know that, first of all, and I have no idea. That's a really interesting question. I will try and figure that out for you.
Mad Stelik, last time I was at JSC doing maintenance, I got to see a Volkswagen Beetle-sized 3D printer rover intended to take over, which is actually what we were just talking about earlier when we were talking about the, pretty much what we were talking about when we were talking about the Moon Village project, the 3D printing of buildings on the moon, and inflating the building and then 3D printing a structure around them out of regolith to provide safety and security and such. That's kind of cool. And welcome.
That's interesting. So, like, I would love... I'm going to read more about this, and I will talk about it on a future episode. But basically, in a really weird set of circumstances, they actually believe that billions of years ago that Venus's atmosphere is more like the Earth's, but it became much more dense, whereas the Mars lost its atmosphere. So I will definitely look into that and try and give a better answer. What I was wondering about that might be the answer to that question is that Venus may be still... in fact, I believe we know that it is still geologically active. And that may be producing enough, because one thing to understand is that Mars did not lose its atmosphere quickly. It took a very long time, hundreds of millions of years. So there's a decent chance that Venus's atmosphere is just being continuously replenished by geologic activity, and it's not being blown away for that reason. But I will definitely take a look into it. Thank you.
So clearly what we have to do is launch a nuke into the center of Mars and restart its core.
It's been considered.
Okay. Right. Where were we?
Not seriously considered. It's been considered.
It's been considered, as a script for a low-budget B-movie.
Yeah, totally. You should totally put up the core. Anyway, power generation.
Punish everyone that much.
A power generation on Mars. So, solar power generation on Mars works quite well, but it will require more solar panels for a given amount of power because, of course, it's significantly further from the sun. Nuclear remains an excellent option on Mars. In fact, probably the best option. And additionally, those two options we've learned recently can be supplemented by wind. And I love this picture, and there's a specific reason for that. I love this picture from NASA because it does show the amount of reactors they think they'll need on the surface. And if you see the power line running across the ground, it's actually running out into the distance into a huge field of solar panels. So this kind of shows the setup for a future Mars base. You'd have the nuclear reactors and the huge field of solar panels. Now, of course, we come back around to food. Food.
I, to be honest, rather enjoy food. I've heard that it's important for life.
Very. So, the food situation on Mars is not notably different than on the moon. With the possible exception that there's less light reaching Mars. So even if a greenhouse is on the surface, optimal food production may need to include additional lighting artificially. Regular resupply missions would still be the method of choice for replenishing a lot of the food stores, but given the long transit times from Earth to Mars, you would also need to work pretty hard at making food production there sustainable in case something disrupted that regular train of deliveries.
Again, we all know that potatoes work.
Yeah.
And think of all the things you can make out of potatoes. There's potatoes, baked potatoes, stir-fried potatoes, potato stew, potato soup, potato pasta,
potato chips,
potato cereal.
All right. So we're going to move on now to the
vodka.
The two plans that exist for
Yeah.
Mars.
So this one was fun doing some research on. It's like, hey, who does anyone have any plans for going to Mars? And you know how earlier I was like, there aren't many plans for going to the moon. There's like maybe 6 or 7. And then looking up plans for going to Mars, there's like, yeah. So there's the good plan, and then there's this one. Would you like to talk about them, please?
All right. You've probably heard about these folks joked about in the news. This is Mars 1. So Mars 1 is still around. I mean, I know that might surprise you. Mars 1 is still around, and they're still talking about their mission. They struggle greatly with funding. Mars 1's idea was...
Hang on. Everyone, calm your horses. I just didn't want to get into all the things you can make with potatoes because we'd need another podcast for that. Another 3-hour-long podcast for me just to list the things that can be made with potatoes. I like potatoes. Is that like the guy from Forrest Gump?
Yes. With all the different types of shrimp dishes?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mars 1's been around for 7 years. Most people know of it. They plan to fund their Mars mission by making it a reality TV show.
Hey, everything good comes from reality TV.
Yeah. So they have suffered big problems with funding, as you can imagine. They don't really have a plan that many people think is workable because they don't have any money or technical expertise. But we'll show you their plan. Go ahead, David. So 2018, they plan to start crew training. And they're apparently going to train together for 13 years. Wow.
We're getting our astronauts when they're 12. So that by the time they're 25, we can launch.
So they plan to launch a demonstration mission in 2022. Who knows? You never know, right? Like maybe somebody will give them $10 billion and they'll be like, okay, we're going. Until that happens, you got to take a lot of this with a grain of salt.
I mean, I'm sorry, but their plan are for a camera to enable a video stream from Mars to Earth, a water extraction experiment to confirm that water can be extracted from the soil, a thin film solar panel experiment testing multiple brands and types of solar panels, and a payload selected from the entries of universities worldwide. Sorry, that last one's cut off on the... There.
So in 2024, they're going to apparently launch a communication satellite to Mars. I mean, at least this is something you would have to do. Now, relaying videos from Mars is a very difficult thing. So this is going to have to be one hell of a communication satellite. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, we can go through all of this, but 2026 there's a rover mission. 2029
and another concept.
6 cargo missions. 2030 an operational outpost apparently. 2031, the first crew depart. 2032, the first crew land. And 2033, a second crew launches. And then an extra crew launches every 26 months after that.
Yep. Which is every time the Holman transfer window to Mars opens.
Yeah. Just no.
Again, I give them props for trying, I guess, but it's just not doesn't really have a lot of basis in reality. Right. So moving on to someone who many people say have no basis in reality, but actually do things.
Hang on, sorry, people in chat have never had poutine. You don't need to buy poutine from a place. Just find French fries, cheese curds, and gravy. Make the fries. At the end, when the fries are done in the oven, take them out, or even better if you have a deep fryer, take them out of the oven, sprinkle the cheese curds on them, put them back in for a little bit. The fries, you want them to be slightly overcooked, and the cheese curds, you want them already to be slightly melty. Then you pile that all into a bowl and pour on some nice warm gravy on it. Bam. Poutine,
and
eat it.
Grab a fork
so good.
And just chow down.
Just get fat. Just get fat.
Brown gravy.
Brown gravy. It got to be brown gravy. The browner, the better. Though there are some places that use chicken gravy, makes it a completely different experience. You can also like chop up like some smoked meat or something, throw that on. Put in some onion. You can literally put anything in it. Everything works in it. You can also make poutine with, instead of pouring on gravy, you pour on like butter chicken.
Oh yeah.
So, just poutine. Anything can be made into poutine, and it's so good. Sorry to interrupt this normally scheduled science podcast, but this is important news. Poutine. It's what's for dinner.
You should have a poutine show.
I would love to do a poutine show. Yeah. Okay.
SpaceX image gallery.
Yes. Sorry. Wait. I'm doing a thing. What am I doing? Right here. Images.
So, the only other group with a plan to colonize Mars is SpaceX. So, SpaceX. This is not an updated vision. This is not an updated. Big Falcon rocket, BFR, or Big Fucking Rocket.
The second one.
But the plan is still the same. So, the Mars transportation architecture is currently being built by SpaceX. The reason people give SpaceX the benefit of the doubt is they are actually doing these things. BFS, which is the second stage, or spaceship, depending what you prefer, is already started production. And the engines for the rocket are basically done. Their initial ramp from development to production. Very close to being done. Now, so what you do is you launch a Big Falcon spaceship into orbit. Then you refuel it until it's full, using either tankers from the ground or an orbital refueling station if we have one. And then it is full of fuel again. And it can power its way to Mars from Earth. It will then land. What's up?
Oh, just Elwook. First 4 episodes. Check. More than Mars 1.
So it would then land on Mars. And in the future, when they have the infrastructure built up, it would get refueled from the ISRU, which means in situ resource utilization. Basically, that Sabatier reaction I talked about before. There'll be like a little factory on the surface making fuel, and it will refuel from that and can come home.
Sargareth says, I thought the second stage can't land in an atmosphere.
It's designed to land in an atmosphere.
It's
like
what it does.
specifically designed to land in an atmosphere. That's why it has those flaps.
I don't know if I have that video.
That's fine.
Give me
That's
1
fine.
second.
You don't need it.
Okay, on SpaceX's website, there's actually a really cool video that shows how they actually plan to use the atmosphere of Mars to do most of the work. They're going to use the atmosphere and the aerodynamics to bleed off most of the speed, so they actually require a much less hard burn at the end, which is really cool. SpaceX.com/Mars.
So why don't they reuse second stages now? So here's the deal. We just started reusing first stages, and the only reason we can do it is they don't get going as fast. They get going, I mean, the speeds are almost ridiculous at this point, but the first stage only gets going about half as fast as a second stage, and or even less. I'm not 100% on that number. And that allows them to sort of turn around, come back, and land. Also, they're blessed with having 9 engines and a bunch of extra fuel. The job of a second stage is to get the payload going at an orbital velocity, and sometimes very high velocity if it's going to like something like a geostationary transfer orbit. So it's going much faster. And the problem is not only that, but it doesn't have very much fuel, and it only has 1 engine that cannot be operated in atmosphere because it is a vacuum engine.
Sargareth says, I thought you said the engines designed to work in space don't work to reland in Atmo. And that's what we were talking about. They don't. You're correct. But on the BFR, there's only one of those engines. The others work in Atmo, right?
So, in the way that the current BFR is set up, the new one that they just talked about 2 weeks ago now, is that to reduce the amount of development risk they have, they're actually not putting any vacuum engines on the entire vehicle at all. They're going to take the efficiency loss that they get from that and just live with it for now. It can lift so much payload mass that the loss in potential payload doesn't really matter. And so they only have sea level engines on that vehicle. So when it lands, it actually has a lot of capability to land. It has 7 engines. The BFS does.
Yeah.
The actual spaceship. Now, sorry, go ahead.
Mad Stelic has a question there. Did they ever mention what their intention was for cosmic rays, alpha, high energy protons, mitigation of that such?
No.
I think what I remember hearing at the time of the initial presentation was Musk basically saying it's a risk that they have to take and there's very little actual danger of it. And I know there has been some speculation of like having water stores on the inside of it, sort of protecting on the outside.
Yeah, it's like a skin.
Yeah.
But that's a thought. They haven't actually. I mean, that they have never suggested that. A lot of this comes down to there may not be a good way to solve that problem. You can solve parts of the radiation problem, mostly the solar energy problem or the solar radiation problem. Like even the magnetic field, the localized magnetic field generator that's been talked about for use on spacecraft. It cannot stop a high energy cosmic ray. So this is going to very likely just be something we deal with. At least in the short term. I'm sure in the future we'll have some way to figure it out, but that's where we're at right now. So
one of the things to remember is this is essentially like the colonization of the New World hundreds of years ago.
Oh yeah.
It's not safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be safe. There is no way to make it 100% safe. They are going to do everything they can, but at the end of the day...
Yeah. So basically, people need to... and this is this is something that's been talked a lot about in the sort of SpaceX community. Is SpaceX and NASA and everyone else will have to work to try and change the perception here for space travel. And Elon Musk has been trying. In his 2016 presentation, which was the first real presentation for this architecture, he said, one of the first things he said, people will die doing this. There's no way around it. There's no way to stop it. There's just too many possible ways of dying on a mission like that. You got to keep in mind, these missions are very likely going to be 4 years in deep space. That's hard to eliminate risk from. Now, do you want to continue cycling us through our images there?
Yeah, I wanted to do a quick reminder of, like, space travel's never been safe, and we've gotten pretty good at rockets recently, but we lost 2 shuttles, and there were only 135 shuttles launched. So even a
low Earth orbit,
even low Earth orbit, that's still a higher than a 1% loss rate, right? If my math.
Yep, sure is.
It's like 1.6 or 7 or something. That's.
It's just it is what it
exists. So,
and part of what made the shuttle losses so nasty is there were so many people on board.
Yes.
I think there was 7 on each flight.
Yeah, it's a total of 14 astronauts lost.
So now, back to SpaceX.
Yes,
plans.
sorry.
So they their current plans are. So this is how they would get there. This is sort of what a trip looks like and how they would get home. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yep, got it.
Now radiation is radiation. There's actually a recent study done that actually suggested that a trip to Mars would only give you about 60%, only give you about 60% of your lifetime maximum radiation. That's without any like real serious efforts at mitigation. Hopefully we can get that down to something that's a little more reasonable, or find some way of like fixing DNA damage. I don't know. So here is the plan. Interestingly, these slides are actually from last year, but the plan hasn't changed. They are still steadfastly marching towards this goal. Can you go back one?
Oh yeah, sorry.
So their plan is to launch 2 cargo missions in 2022 to Mars. They would confirm water resources, identify hazards, place power, mining, and life support infrastructure for future flights. And then in 2024, their plan is to send 2 cargo and 2 cruise ships. The 2 crew would take the first people ever to Mars. And of course, the 2 cargo ships would bring more equipment and supplies, and the purpose of that mission would be to set up the propellant production plant and to build a base to prepare for expansion. This is a high-risk mission. They have no way to get home when they get there, and they have to build their way home. They need to build a propellant production plant when they get there, and then wait the 2 years that it takes to open another transfer window. And the hope is that by then they've produced enough propellant to get home. Yeah. Fun. So these missions are high risk. They will be incredibly exciting and potentially incredibly terrifying. But this is still the plan as it stands today. Next slide, sir.
Way ahead of you.
So these images are not what they've specifically said. This is not exactly what a base would look like. This is a surface base, and I've already mentioned the possible problems with surface bases. There are definitely solutions, but
one of those solutions being the Boring Company.
Well, that wouldn't be a surface base. That'd be an underground base.
Exactly. That's the solution.
You could also make your buildings out of radiation resistant materials, but I don't know how feasible that really is. Regardless, let's run through the possible base build up here. And so you can see building landing pads for future ships. And you can also see that a couple of those original ships are kind of just staying there. Building roads, building habitats, building a lot of power production. And then more power production. Lots of greenhouses. Need a lot of food production capacity. And I love this picture. So this is a recent picture. Oh no, that's not the recent. Nope. I grabbed the wrong one. Ha ha! Fun. There is a version of that picture that is the recent one. I will try and find it so I can give it to David and he can put it up. Because that's how we roll on this this Relay Space podcast. But as many of you saw recently, the new BFR, the changes are that it has excuse me. The biggest changes are that it has 3 large fins at the back now that will be used as landing legs. And going forward, it also has changes to the engine configuration that I mentioned. And David, there is a new link in the document. There you go. All right, and also, it also got canards, which are little front flaps up near the near the crew section, and that just gives it increased control when it's entering atmosphere. It should also be noted that BFR is significantly, or BFS, the spaceship itself is significantly larger in terms of actual physical size than it was before. I think this is just they did some assessments on how much room there were for people, how much room there was for cargo, and made some changes. And yeah, so this is like a possible future. Interestingly, always the one to push the optimistic timeline. Elon Musk was asked when this picture might become a reality, and his answer was possibly by 2028.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, that would be cool. Now, more likely about twice that long, but...
Analemma asks, do you think they'll actually have that many surface buildings, or will they build more underground with help from Boring Co?
I think almost certainly they will build underground. That's just my personal opinion.
One thing that you do see here, which probably makes sense, is the big dome that you see is more of the greenhouse that they probably want on the surface for sun, though we don't really know how radiation and stuff would affect the plants, and maybe that would also be bad. So we don't know.
Figure stuff out.
It's stuff that hasn't been done.
Yep.
So
now, so where are we at with this? SpaceX has produced the first pieces of the hull for the first Big Falcon ship. Their plan is to do hop tests with the BFS, which basically are the first powered flights. Just basically lifting off a little bit, and then you fly up, and then you fly down, and then you do it again. You go up a little bit, and then you go down, just to sort of make sure the vehicle works. Those are planned for next year, probably towards the end of the year. If everything goes perfectly, keep in mind all of these timelines, and Elon actually explained this recently. All the timelines he gives are, if everything goes perfectly, this is when it would be. So, if everything goes perfectly, in 2020, you would see high altitude, high speed tests with the BFS, and then the initial tests of the booster, and then probably a full up flight of BFR in 2021. or late 2020 possibly. And then that would get us to basically what it sounds like to me. If they are actually going to keep their timeline, is that they would be launching cargo missions to Mars as some of the first full like fully realized BFR missions. And it wouldn't surprise me for them to see them just try and see if it worked. As soon as they could possibly pull it off. This is all private money, remember? So they're going to do it on their own. And they would love to sign a contract with NASA for BFR, but they haven't, and they don't really expect to. So they're going to give it a shot.
NASA is supposed to be working on a new Mars rover, are they not?
Yeah, it goes up in a little under 2 years. It's going to start flying there.
Cool.
There are five planetary science missions going to Mars in 2020. Super exciting.
That's pretty awesome. Now,
including 3 rovers.
I do have a question. Could they not pay a bit to SpaceX to send up one of their older rovers just to put another rover on the planet?
They don't have any spare rovers.
Don't they have spare second ones that they keep on hand?
Yeah, but they're usually not ready to go tomorrow, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, yeah, they do, but they could do that. I don't expect them to do that. They would want to probably put a new rover up because they want to use new technology. So yeah, that's basically where we stand for plans for Mars habitation. It's mostly SpaceX at this point. I would say if SpaceX is able to pull this off, expect to see them get a lot of attention from NASA once they do it, or once it looks like they can do it. NASA's not going to be left out of this party, you know. They will. Oh my god, my mic is giving me all sorts of trouble here. All right. Anyway, so a couple of things I wanted to touch on before we finish the show, which will be very shortly here. We know we've kept you guys for a while now. 2 things that really have to be kept into consideration. Something that's been studied for a very long time surrounding this mission and these types of missions is psychology. It is of great concern. How do you deal with a group of people who are going to be isolated in a small group for years at a time in very challenging circumstances?
If you've ever worked with or lived with a person that you can leave the general vicinity of, you still probably hate them.
It's definitely a problem, but props to those organizations out there. There have been many, many, many studies done on this phenomenon. There are many studies ongoing on this phenomenon, and they will continue. They're trying very hard to understand what types of people work well together, what types of personalities can withstand the stress, and so it's going to be, and some people would be perfectly happy doing a mission like this. There are a lot of people who would be stressed out of their minds, even people who don't think they would be. But don't be too surprised if you see some former NASA astronauts get recruited for these missions simply because they've already been tested in space. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention is something that isn't talked about too much, but it does come up every once in a while, and it is something that we need to consider. Something that we, due to our hang-ups, have basically not talked about at all.
Which is dumb. We're dumb.
Sex and reproduction on Mars, or in space, or on the moon. It is something that needs to be considered. We have done no research on this at all. We know nothing at this point. These topics will need to be studied. I think they probably will be.
Well, how do you send two astronauts up and are like, okay, as part of your job, bone, please.
I don't think that's what you do. I don't think that's what you do. I think you say...
Also, we're going to watch.
No. I think what you say is, we know this might happen. If it does, can you just tell us, like...
Tell us about it?
Tell us if there is anything relevant that we need... Or write a paper about it. You're all scientists. You know?
I mean, it's NASA, so it would all be public knowledge. So...
It's definitely something we need to understand, because we do need to actually know at some point whether humans can even conceive in microgravity. It is an important thing to ask.
Can our fishies swim?
Yeah. Now, my thoughts are probably, but it does raise some questions about exactly what would happen. But I mean, there really is no possible way to have a colony without having reproduction on the surface. So, it's definitely something that needs to be thought. Yeah, right. I don't think that would be a better situation. It does need to be thought about and studied going into the future.
Have we tested on mammals, like mice or anything on the ISS?
We are actually. They're finally doing it. Yeah. There is a test of that, basically a giant experiment of that kind that's happening, I think, this year on the space station. They're sending up tons of mice, and they just want to see what happens when they, get it on in space.
It's funny because I think I've actually read some of the reports of they're sending mice to space, and very few of them are like they're sending mice to see them bone.
Yeah,
they avoid that.
In this case.
Everything we avoid that sex is a thing that happens and that we don't know how it works, and the avoidance of that is actually very akin to another subject that is very, very dear to my heart, and that is pooping, and how we as a society do not talk about pooping. It's why every chance I get, I mention that you should probably get yourself a squatty potty, because squatty potties help put your body in a natural position to help pooping. Pooping is important. So is breeding. We need to know how to do both.
Yep. Niskavian, basically we don't know anything. I don't think anyone actually has been studied at all. It's kind of annoying, but and as far as we're aware, there's obviously no proof one way or the other, but as far as NASA is aware, no one has ever had sex in space. That is pretty much guaranteed to change in the next 10 years, I think. But that's where we're at right now. Cyberwolf was saying that that gravity is what causes the egg to drop down from the fallopian tubes into the uterus. Maybe, maybe it's just like what am I trying? Cilia, or not cilia, but maybe there's an physiological process that moves it through the fallopian tube. We don't really know, or I don't even. Maybe we do know. I might not know. But I think the only way to find out if it would happen in microgravity is to actually study it. So it's something that we need to look into. It is it's sort of part of the long-term strategy for figuring this stuff out. So that is our basically run through of some of the things we need to consider for colonizing the moon and Mars.
Sorry, I'm having a discussion about poop.
Yeah, pooping in space is it's not a lot of fun. Toilets are a problem. They've never done a very good job of it, but that's because it's really hard.
That's pretty bad. I mean, the only way to do it really is suction, because
pretty much. But the toilet, like they've had lots of problems that the toilet breaks all the time.
But
Because
that's actually interesting. But that's interesting because that's on the ISS in 0G. Yep. Even on something as low gravity as the moon, theoretically,
you get some help.
The poop would fall. You can pee
very slowly.
And you might have to give it a hand.
Yes, you might have to give it a hand. Oh boy.
So I believe,
that's all for our show tonight.
That's our topic for today. That was life on Moon and Mars. I think 2 weeks from now, correct? 2 weeks from now, there will not be an episode because we are in Austin, Texas, at CitizenCon.
So I would like to go ahead.
I think the episode after that, I don't know. I don't even know if we'll do it on the 9th. We might need some time off of being in Texas for a week. But let's say we come back
the 9th. We're in Texas. So then
the 16th. I'm saying probably back for another of these on the 23rd.
Except that I'm gone that week. You're
gone that week. Okay, then let's try for the 16th.
Yeah, we're gonna try for the 16th, and try maybe while I'm in Texas, I can work on my laptop to get a program ready for that show.
We also will probably be talking on that show about the NASA.
We might. That's a big topic.
Well, no, about because we're supposed to visit the.
Oh, that would be a good idea to talk about Johnson Space Center.
Yeah, we're supposed to visit Johnson Space Center. We might talk about Johnson Space Center because we
had a plan to do an Apollo episode, which is a big episode.
Yeah.
But I don't think the Apollo episode is going to be our next episode. We will definitely get to it. Our next episode will probably be recapping our journey through Johnson Space Center in Houston, which we are going to as part of our CitizenCon trip.
We're trying to go on the 11th, correct?
Matt Stelick, we are going on the 11th. Yeah, that's our plan.
Yeah.
The 11th of October. Yeah, the Thursday.
We're a bunch of Canucks. We're going to visit Johnson Space Center because...
Yep.
Why the hell not? Really? If we're in Texas.
Yeah, our plan is to basically spend the day at Johnson Space Center because I've heard it's large.
Yeah. So we've got couple days for CitizenCon and a day for Johnson Space Center. And then with any luck on the 16th, we'll have another one of these talking about Johnson Space Center and our trip there because we probably won't have time for much of an info episode. The episode after that, though, tentatively the 30th, we're going to cover Apollo.
Yeah. Maybe not footage. We'll see. Maybe we will have some footage. Probably pretty much definitely a ton of pictures.
Yeah. We're going to get whatever we can. And yeah.
Also, Desmarius and I are visiting McGregor, Texas, which is a rocket testing facility for SpaceX, and we're also visiting Boca Chica, Texas, which is the future site of Big Falcon rocket launches. And we're going to check them out, and we'll have some pictures from that as well.
Yeah. So the next episode will be more of a show and tell.
Apparently, our brains will explode at CitizenCon, and we won't have another.
Well, I mean, my brain's going to explode because I'm going up in a plane, and everyone knows that those are unpressurized death traps. So
they're not going to pressurize your plane.
They actually forgot to pressurize the plane recently, and everyone in the cabin started bleeding from the ears and eyes.
Did they all die?
They didn't, but they probably wished they were dead.
What? Can you send me a link on this?
Passengers bled from their ears after pilots forgot to pressurize a plane.
On September 20th. Wow. Okay. All right. That's it for the show this evening. Yeah. Thank you for watching Relay Space. Don't bleed from your ears and eyes. Thanks. Good night.
We'll see ya.